What's up, guys and girls? We're here at Reebok CrossFit Back Bay, and what I want to go over this month in terms of modifying workouts for athletes that are in pain, or how we have athletes train around pain. What do we do when we're having pain with squatting? And without getting into too much, once again, of the whys or the causes of this, I'm going to say this. There are certain prerequisites that athletes need to fulfill or ensure to squat correctly, whether it's the ankles, hips, or spine. You don't have one of those, you load yourself, great way to ensure an injury. So guys, if we have any sort of pain with anything or any sort of mobility restrictions that aren't clearing up on their own, I'm always going to recommend to see a healthcare provider. If you don't have one or you're having trouble finding one that actually understands training and isn't going to tell you to just stop training, movementproviders.com, great resource. So what do we do in the meantime if we're having pain with squatting, we're on a Movement Providers waiting list, do we just stop squatting? Absolutely not. I want people to continue to train their lower body, continue to squat. So we just need to find ways to modify it or train around pain. So where do we start with modifying the squat? So before we start even playing around with different squatting variations, loading parameters, the first thing I do with all my patients and athletes is just change the stance. A lot of times people get stuck in this one-size-fits-all mindset of feet shoulder width apart, toes pointing forward. That's definitely a great starting point for someone that's never squatted before, but everyone's torso angle, femur length, anatomy or shape of the pelvis, bony anatomy of the ankles, it's all going to be different. So there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for squatting. A lot of times by just simply going a little wider with the stance or simply toeing out takes all the pain away. So guys, play around with different hip widths and foot positions. Toeing out up to 30 degrees is totally fine, it's safe. Then in terms of depth, that's another thing I start modifying before we start even changing the squat. A lot of problems in the squat don't start happening for the knees, hips, or lower back till we get to parallel or lower. I know everyone really likes squatting ass to grass and it's great, but if we can continue to squat, load the legs, and just go through a shorter range of motion, that's totally fine. So simply by even using something like a box to monitor that depth, because a lot of problems, like I said, don't start until we break parallel. So simply have someone squat to a box, to a bench. Just have them decrease the range of motion. There is nothing wrong with squatting through a shorter range of motion. I know there's a ton of benefits through squatting through a full range of motion, but for a period of time, to limit that range if it's pain-free until it actually gets taken care of, there's nothing wrong with that at all. So, if changing the width or the depth with a normal front squat, back squat, overhead squat still doesn't work, the place I like to start with my patients are goblet squats. So goblet squats are good because it changes the center of mass, so it's easier to maintain that upright position. So whereas if we don't have the required mobility with, let's say, a front squat or a back squat, watch what happens. I get down in the bottom position of my squat, and then when I go to stand up, if I don't have good ankle mobility, let's say, my butt goes up first like that, then I come up. That's a great way to irritate the knees, hips, lower back. So, changing the center of the mass with kettlebell, I can maintain more of an upright torso very easily. This is always a good starting point when people are having pain with squatting, is to take it to a goblet squat. If that variation is still painful or uncomfortable, I always go to a split squat next. And I know there's hundreds of variations of split squats out there. There's Russian, there's Bulgarian, there's all those other Eastern European countries, there's front foot, back foot elevated. We are simply going to start with a split squat stance, both feet on the floor, squat. So it's going to look like this. So, kettlebells like this, feet just like this. We're going to go slow down, slow back up. The only two things I'm concerned about, this front leg, this tibia angle, for the most part stays straight up and down, so the knee isn't tracking forward a lot. Next, this back leg right here. I like to see this femur angle a little behind me, but I don't want this crazy exaggerated lunge. That's going to help take a lot of pressure off the knees and lower back if you're having either one of those issues. Also the hips. So these are my two starting points I like to go from. Alright, so split squat, goblet squats still don't work. I like to take it to a landmine squat. Landmine squatting, once again, we're just changing that loading parameters, and we're loading the legs a little differently. So simply, just like the landmine deadlift from last month, landmine squat, same thing, just like this. It helps maintain that upright torso, proper squatting mechanics, less stress on the lower back, hips, and knees. The last one that I like to do, trap bar deadlift. So if you referenced last month's video with the trap bar, great way to train the legs. All right, guys, so far we've played with changing squat width, squat stance, whether it's foot position, width of the feet, also the depth in which we squat, changing it up to try to minimize the amount of pain or eliminate pain we're having with the squatting. Then we looked at squat variability, so all the different squatting, whether it was the trap bar deadlift, the landmine squat, split squatting, and goblet squatting. So another thing I want to talk about is loading parameters. So specifically with the split squat, there's so many different ways you can load the legs from the split squat. You can hold it with, or load it with just one kettlebell in the goblet position. You can go front rack. You can go kettlebells at the side. You can do a barbell on the back, on the front rack. And that really goes with all the different variations of squats. There's so many different ways to load it as well. So with loading parameters, a lot of times we get stuck just doing front squats or back squats and we don't do anything else. So even if you've got perfect mobility across the board, a lot of times you're just overdoing the same thing all the time. So you just want to change up or have a little more variability in your training. Then the last thing, time under tension. Like last month we covered increasing more awareness in the deadlift, slowing things down to maintain proper position. No different than the squat. All too often people just like to drop down to the bottom, pray to God they can bounce out. I want to slow it down, create awareness so we can practice perfect positions. So if that's 1, 2, 3 down, hang out for a couple seconds in the hole, maintain that good position, then slowly coming back up as well. Play with different time under tensions to create that awareness. Don't be so concerned about weight, more on perfect technique, quality, or making the squat look good.